They say blood is thicker than water, that the bond between a mother and daughter is unbreakable. But they never tell you what happens when that bond is used as a chain, when the one person you love most in the world starts using her voice as a weapon, and your tears become the soundtrack to her frustration. 2 days ago, I finally realized that if my loving, brilliant, and deeply stressed mother wasn't going to listen to me, then I had to teach her what it felt like to be unheard. And the only way to do that was to weaponize my own silence. If you've ever felt like the smallest person in the room, constantly shouted down, or forced to swallow your feelings just to keep the peace, hit that like button right now. Let me know I'm not alone. And if you want to hear more stories of quiet rebellion and satisfying, justified revenge, subscribe and ring the bell, because this story is about earning your right to speak. My name is Alar, and I am 17, the middle child in a household of 4 kids, which, if you know anything about large families, means you're either the mediator or the invisible one. For me, it was a frustrating, exhausting mix of both. My mom, Clara, is 45. On paper, she is a superhero. She juggles a part-time job, keeps 4 of us fed, clothed, and on schedule, and still finds the time to volunteer at the church every Sunday. I genuinely love her to bits. She's the person who taught me how to read music, how to argue a point logically, and how to bake a truly incredible apple pie. But there's a side of her, a jagged, unpredictable edge, that comes out when the pressure hits. And lately, the pressure has been hitting hard. It's that kind of anger that doesn't just flare up and die down. It pulls, it simmers, and then it spills over onto the nearest, most vulnerable person, which, unfortunately, was often me. The issues usually started small, mostly rooted in the inherent chaos of our house. We are all, generally, expected to clean up after ourselves, and often after each other's system my mom put in place to teach teamwork. Honestly, that part is fair. We are family, and we should share the load. But 2 days ago, it wasn't about the dishes or the scattered Legos. It was about something far more insidious, the sheer exhaustion of always being the one who had to be the adult. My twin sister, Willow, and I are best friends, but she's the quiet, observant type. Our 2 younger siblings are, well, children, the kind that leaves a sticky trail of life everywhere they go. I was in the kitchen, stacking plates and wiping down the counter for the 3rd time that morning when the resentment finally hit me. It felt like a physical weight settling on my shoulders. I simply asked my mom, not yelling, not aggressive, just, why is it always me who has to reset the whole house right before lunch? Can the others at least handle their own breakfast mess? And that was it. That simple, logical question was the spark that hit the soaked tinder of her stress. Her response wasn't a conversation. It was an explosion. Don't you dare question my system. LR, do you think I have time to delegate chores like I'm running a corporate office? You're here, help out. It's called being part of a family. The volume was immediate. The kind of volume that makes your ears ring and your chest feel tight. I tried, calmly, to explain. I used her own logic against her. Mom, I'm happy to help. But if the system is we all clean up after each other, then where are the others? Willow is doing homework, and the little ones are watching cartoons. It's not fair for one person to carry the whole load. But she wasn't listening to the words. She was listening to the tone of dissent. Oh, it's not fair. You think this whole life is fair, LR? You have a roof over your head, food in your stomach, and you're complaining about 30 minutes of work. What is wrong with you? Why do you have to be so difficult? That word, difficult, It's her favorite hammer. The air around her was thick with fury. I could feel the knot tightening in my stomach. But then, the real injustice started. She moved on from the chores and began dragging up past grievances, things that were irrelevant, things that had already been resolved, things that frankly didn't even make sense. And you know what else? Last week, when you wore that shirt to school, it was inappropriate. And your attitude with your teacher, that whole thing was completely disrespectful. You need to stop thinking the world revolves around you. I was frozen. My hands were shaking. The shirt, that was 3 months ago, and she hadn't said a word. The teacher, I had gotten an error on that assignment, and the only attitude was me asking for clarification. It was pure emotional dumping. She wasn't seeking resolution. She was seeking a punching bag. I tried to interject, to defend myself, to appeal to her logic. Mom, that's not fair. I tried to explain the situation with the teacher, and you didn't even listen. You're yelling at me for things that are completely unrelated just because you're stressed. The volume escalated again. Her face was flushed, her voice cracking with strained emotion. I could see the tiny beads of sweat on her forehead. The sound wasn't just noise. It was an assault dot, and then the hot, undeniable sting of tears hit my eyes. I hate crying. It feels like surrender, but the sheer unfairness, the betrayal of being attacked by the one person meant to protect you was too much. The tears weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, furious frustration. Just as she was winding up for the final, devastating blow, a quiet voice cut through the chaos. Mom, stop. Yelling isn't helping. She's crying. It was Willow, my quiet, observant twin. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression utterly neutral, but her eyes holding a weary kind of disapproval. She didn't yell, she didn't beg, she just stated a fact. That simple intervention, that tiny moment of being seen, was enough to burst my mom's bubble of rage. She glared at Willow, clearly torn between lashing out at her too and realizing she had just crossed a line in front of a witness. With a dramatic, heavy sigh that sounded more like a disgusted snort, she turned on her heel and stormed off, disappearing into the hallway. The sudden vacuum of silence was almost worse than the noise. I stood there, hyperventilating slightly, the taste of salt and our own tears on my tongue. Willow just put a gentle hand on my shoulder and gave her a squeeze before quietly walking away. I was emotionally shredded. My heart was pounding, my hands still shaking. I felt utterly helpless. For a while, I just dissociated. I felt disconnected, numb. The house felt foreign. The anger and the pain were so overwhelming that my brain just checked out. I went through the motions, clearing up the mess I'd already cleared up, and started making myself some lunch. I was utterly alone, eating a simple sandwich, but inside, a quiet, cold, and calculated resolve was starting to set. The pain hadn't gone away, but the helplessness had. If she wasn't going to listen to me when I used my words, then I wouldn't listen to her when she used hers. This wasn't about getting mad. This was about making her feel the isolation she had just inflicted on me. This was the birth of the quiet rebellion. The shift from being a victim to being a participant in a silent war was immediate and invigorating. The trembling in my hands was replaced by a strange, icy calm. I didn't want to be mean to her. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I just wanted her to stop viewing my attempts at communication as insubordination. I wanted her to hear the logic, not just the volume. And the only way to get her to hear was to make her desperate to be heard. My luncher hastily assembled ham and cheese sandwich was my fortress. I was sitting at the kitchen table, chewing slowly, letting the silence of the house settle around me. Every bite felt deliberate. I needed the energy, the focus. I had been yelling with my mother for over 20 minutes. And now, my moment had arrived. She returned from her self-imposed exile, clearly expecting me to be hunched over, sopping, or at least penitent. She walked in with that characteristic "I'm still mad, but I'm ready to move on now" posture. Her voice, though no longer a yell, was tight and commanding. "LR, go get the clothes out of the dryer and fold the whites." Now, it was a statement, not a request, and I was still eating. I looked down at my sandwich, then up at her, my expression utterly placid. No defiance, no anger, just calm, quiet logic. "Can I finish my food first?" I asked. A pause. She was taken aback by my lack of emotional response. She seemed to expect a tearful yes. "Mom, I'm sorry. No, it needs to be done now. The laundry is piling up." I took another bite of my sandwich, chewed it slowly, swallowed. I didn't break eye contact. "But why do I have to help? It's not my clothes," I repeated, maintaining the same low, even, completely unemotional tone. She bristled. The red was creeping back into her neck. "Don't you start with me again, LR. We just went through this. You are part of this family, and you are going to help." I didn't acknowledge the explosion. I just looked at her, calmly. "Why do I have to help? It's not my clothes." It was like watching a cartoon character short circuit. The calm repetition of a simple, logical counterargument was hitting her like a wall of Teflon. She couldn't attach rage to it because there was no anger to feed on. There was only a quiet, unflappable 17-year-old eating a sandwich. She took a step closer. Her voice was rising again. I said, "Now, this is a perfect example of your attitude, LR. You don't get to just ignore me. You don't get to not listen to me without consequences." And this was the line, the precise moment of true, delicious, cold-blooded psychological warfare. I looked her dead in the eye, still chewing, and simply said, "That's fine." And then I took another bite of my sandwich. The look on her face was priceless, pure, unadulterated shock, rapidly melting into towering fury. She was used to my tears, my storming off, my slamming doors. She was used to the fight. She was not prepared for the surrender delivered with the total conviction of a political hostage negotiator. She opened her mouth, but before she could unleash the full tsunami of her indignation, Willow walked in. "Mom, the laundry is still soaking wet." I put it on the rinse cycle again, saved by the laundry gods. Of all things, my mom blinked, realizing her immediate command was literally impossible to execute. But she couldn't retreat entirely. She was too committed to the control aspect of the conflict. She needed to win this particular battle of wills. Double quotes fine. "You are grounded. LR, you lose phone privileges for the rest of the week." I didn't flinch. I just finished swallowing. "That's fine," I replied, just as calmly as before. The audacity of my complete acceptance disarmed her entirely. She had just used her ultimate weapon, the grounding, and I had effectively said, "Thank you, may I have another?" Then, the final, perfect, and petty touch. I picked up my plate, which still had half a sandwich on it. I held it out to her. "Would you like the rest of my lunch?" The sheer absurdity of the offer, the contrast between her roaring anger and my quiet, even generosity, was a masterpiece of passive resistance. She recoiled as if I had offered her a handful of snakes. "No, just give me your phone." I calmly stood up. I took my plate to the sink, rinsed it off, and placed it in the dishwasher. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and performed with a total absence of emotion. Then I walked to my room, picked up my phone, and walked back to her. I held it out, letting her take it. As she reached for it, I added one more request, delivered in the same perfectly neutral tone. Can I at least text the church about rehearsals tonight? I won't be able to make it if I'm grounded. She had the phone now, her grip tight on the cold metal. The power was back in her hands, but her victory felt hollow. No, you can't. This is a consequence. Lara, that's fine, I repeated, and walked away. The entire exchange from her initial return to the moment she had the phone had taken maybe 5 minutes. But the emotional warfare continued. The revenge wasn't the verbal barbs. It was the hour of silence that followed. I went to my room. I didn't sulk. I didn't rage. I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the total psychological detachment. Every time she called my name, I didn't respond. Every time she tried to give me an instruction from the other room, I didn't move. She yelled, "Lara, go start your homework." I continued to stare at the ceiling. She got louder, pacing the hallway. "Lara, I know you can hear me. Get up." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the hardest part, resisting the urge to comply, to apologize, to break the tension. But I remembered the tears, the unfair accusations, the feeling of being completely silenced. I held firm. I kept reminding myself, she didn't listen to you. Now, she gets to feel what that's like. This wasn't a few seconds of defiance. This lasted probably 30 to 60 minutes, an entire hour of the two of us existing in the house, where her voice simply ceased to hold authority. She was getting clearly pissed. I could hear her frustrated movements, the muttered complaints, the heavier than necessary slamming of a cupboard door. Her control was slipping, and she knew it. I was weaponizing the one thing she couldn't out-yell. Indifference. My mother is a highly sensitive person. She thrives on connection and control. To have her daughter, the one who looks up to her, suddenly treat her like background noise was a profound psychological shock. It was worse than any argument because she had no footing. She couldn't argue with a wall. She couldn't yell at silence. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably 45 minutes, she cracked. I heard her stop pacing outside my door. A soft, slightly hesitant knock. "Lara, can we talk?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch for another 10 seconds, letting her feel the cold weight of the distance she had created. Then, I quietly got up, opened my door, and looked at her. "Sure," I said, my voice still utterly devoid of any heat or resentment. I needed neutral ground. I needed to move the conversation out of the house, away from the walls that held the echoes of her screaming, away from the distraction of the other kids. "I'm going to go for a walk," I told her. "Would you like to come with me?" The suggestion surprised her. She looked relieved, but also confused. She was expecting a hostage situation, not an invitation. "A walk? Yes, okay, good idea." I put on my shoes and a coat. I offered her the same quiet generosity as I had with the sandwich. I wasn't just walking. I was setting the stage for the real confrontation, the necessary emotional reckoning. I needed her to understand that I was walking away from the fight, not just taking a stroll. The air outside was cold and crisp, stinging my lungs, a perfect counterpoint to the hot, suffocating anger we had just endured indoors. As we walked, the noise of the house faded, and it was just the two of us, crunching leaves underfoot. I started the conversation, not with an attack, but with an explanation. "Mom, I need you to know why I was acting up today. It wasn't because I don't respect you. It wasn't even really about the laundry." I stopped walking and turned to face her. I looked her in the eyes, which were still cloudy with stress and defensiveness. I acted up because when I tried to explain myself, When I try to use my words to tell you how I feel or to point out something that feels unfair, you don't hear me. You immediately start yelling. You move the goalposts. You bring up things that are months old and irrelevant just to win the argument. And when you do that, it makes me feel like my feelings and my logic don't matter. It makes me feel completely helpless. I paused, watching her absorb the words. She kept looking at the ground, a familiar sign of her internal struggle. Today, when you started yelling, I cried. Not because you hurt my feelings, but because I was so frustrated that I couldn't get you to just listen. I tried to explain why I felt the way I did, but you just got louder and angrier. I took a deep breath. This was the moment of complete honesty, the ultimate vulnerability. So, while I was eating my lunch, I decided that if you weren't going to listen to my words, I wouldn't listen to yours. Me ignoring you, me repeating that's fine, me being completely unreactive to your authority, that was my way of making you stop. It was my way of making you feel what it feels like to be completely unheard and completely powerless. It was a petty taste of your own medicine. Mom, I watched her face as I said this. The defensiveness was slowly draining away, replaced by a devastating recognition. She finally looked up, her eyes glossy. I see that. Elara, I do. I pushed my advantage, not with cruelty, but with love. I don't blame you, Mom. I want you to know that. I didn't do this to make you feel bad. I know you're raising 4 children, and you're stressed, and I know you love me. I just need you to know that when you scream at me, it doesn't fix the problem. It just breaks me. And then it happened. The big, hard, necessary crack in her armor. I am so sorry, sweetie, she said, her voice small and shaky, the voice I hadn't heard all day. You're right. You were being completely reasonable, and I let my stress get the better of me. That was unfair. It was awful. I shouldn't have done that to you. She reached out and put her hand on my arm. You were completely reasonable, and I am ungrounding you. Right now, the weight that had been pressing on my chest for the last 2 days lifted. It wasn't the ungrounding that mattered. It was the validation. The moment she acknowledged that my logic, my feelings, and my actions had been reasonable, my petty, quiet rebellion had worked. It had forced her to stop, listen, and apologized. As we walked back toward the house, I felt a calm I hadn't realized I was missing. I had gotten the necessary, emotional, and psychological win. The revenge was complete. The consequence of her actions was the temporary loss of my compliance, and it had forced a dialogue that words alone couldn't achieve. I did end up going to rehearsals that night, and she gave me my phone back with a soft, genuine smile. Before I left, I looked at her. Mom, me ignoring you wasn't necessary, and I'm sorry for that part. I was lying, of course. I thought it was completely necessary, but I needed to offer the olive branch of peace after the war was won. In all honesty, I think my rebellion was completely necessary to get her riled up enough, shaken enough, to actually talk to me about it, to make her see me, truly see me, as a person with valid concerns, not just another object to be controlled in her overwhelming world. We had a long, silent walk to process everything, but we both came home closer than when we left. The story was over. Justice was served, and no one in the family, not my sister, not the little ones, knew about the silent war that had raged and resolved in the space of 1 hour and 1 long walk. Well, no one until now. The real, lasting impact of the silent rebellion wasn't the immediate resolution. It was the psychological shift it created in our relationship. The morning after, the air felt scrubbed clean. There was a lightness, a cautious respect that hadn't been there before. We were going to breakfast together, small, spontaneous date we often did when things were good. It was her peace offering and my acceptance of the truce. The first few hours after the walk were the most delicate. I noticed her watching me, not with anger, but with a kind of thoughtful scrutiny. She was waiting, perhaps, for the other shoe to drop for me to be sullen or resentful. But I wasn't. I was genuinely relieved. I had meticulously avoided saying anything that could be construed as rubbing my victory in her face. My revenge wasn't about dominance. It was about equality. I simply returned to being the loving, helpful daughter I had been before the argument, but with a quiet, new boundary in place. She made dinner that night, and I helped with the dishes without being asked. The difference was, this time, I felt appreciated, not obligated. When the little ones left their toys in the living room, I didn't sigh dramatically. I just put them away. I had fought the fight I needed to fight, and I had won the right to not have to fight the small ones. As I mentioned in the original post, she's really the only one who knows the full context of the silence. To everyone else, Willow, the younger siblings, even my dad, when he came home, it just looked like a typical mother-daughter fight that ended, like most of ours, with a cooling off period and an eventual reconciliation. My sister Willow, the one who broke the initial tension, only knew that Mom had been yelling, I had been crying, and then I was suddenly fine and went on a walk with Mom. When I got my phone back and went to church rehearsals, Willow just chalked it up to Mom coming to her senses. You scared her, didn't you? Willow whispered to me later that night as we were brushing our teeth. What do you mean? I whispered back, the quiet thing. You went totally blank. You didn't fight back. You just existed. She had no idea how to handle that. She's used to us pushing back so she can push harder. But you just took the air out of the room. Willow, ever the observant one, had understood the strategy, if not the full emotional weight of the decision. She understood that my passivity was the weapon. The real, lasting consequence of my rebellion played out over the next few weeks. She didn't stop getting stressed. She's a mom of 4. That's impossible. But the way she reacted changed. Now, when she feels herself getting overwhelmed, I can see the moment the old rage starts to bubble up. Her voice starts to rise. Her hands start to tense. But then, she pauses. She catches herself. The memory of my total, unflinching acceptance of her punishment, my quiet offer of a sandwich, and the simple, devastating "that's fine," is now a governor on her temper. She knows, deep down, that if she pushes me to that breaking point again, I will retreat behind that emotional shield. She knows that she cannot win a war against silence. Instead of yelling, she now often says, I need a minute. Alara will talk about this when I'm calm, and she walks away, not in a huff of self-pity, but to actually de-escalate. That is the true triumph of the revenge. It wasn't just about getting ungrounded. It was about re-engineering the emotional landscape of our relationship. I forced her to see that her actions had immediate, psychological consequences for the person she loved. I taught her that communication is a two-way street, and that if you constantly try to drown out the other person, eventually they will simply walk away. We went to breakfast, and it was lovely. We talked about school, about the church concert, about the little things. It felt like two adults having a conversation, not a parent and a subordinate. The respect was palpable. I had to be cruel to be kind. I had to enact a petty, cold, and calculated form of emotional revenge to force the honesty and vulnerability that our love deserved. Was it revenge? Maybe. Was it petty? Absolutely. But was it necessary? More than anything, the silence broke the cycle of screaming. And for that, I would do it again in a heartbeat. Looking back, I realized that the revenge wasn't the goal. The resolution was. But the truth is, the resolution couldn't have happened without the revenge. My mother is a good woman, a brilliant mother. But like all of us, she needed a lesson in humility and active listening. She needed to know what it felt like to pour energy into a conversation only to have it completely ignored. I created a crisis of authority so that she could recognize the crisis of communication. We are better now, stronger. She trusts me with my own emotions, and I trust her with my vulnerability. We both learned that the loudest person in the room is often the most scared, and sometimes the only way to be heard is to be the quietest. The person I love most in the world finally listened, and that, more than any apology, was my final, greatest victory. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to be the bad guy just to force a good conversation? Where you weaponized your silence or a petty act of defiance to fix a much bigger problem? Tell me your stories of quiet rebellion and justified revenge down in the comments. Let's talk about the hard choices we make to protect our mental health. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more deep dives into the best revenge stories Reddit has to offer. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say, "That's fine."